On a quiet ridge above Long Island, the wind moves through trimmed hedges and long stone terraces. Morning light touches the upper floors of Oheka Mansion, and the grounds seem calm. But the silence feels weighted. Concrete walls hold echoes of ambition, loss, and unanswered stories. The structure stands wide and imposing. It looks permanent. Yet history shows that permanence was never guaranteed here. Records place its early years in an era of wealth and competition. The air in those rooms once carried the sound of music and measured footsteps. Today, visitors describe a different feeling. Long corridors, cold floors. A sense that time slowed down and never fully resumed. Some arrive seeking history. Others arrive seeking something unexplained. Both groups leave with questions. Events tied to this estate reveal more than architecture. They reveal pressure. Money spent to project strength. Decisions made after fear and failure. Years of abandonment that turned grandeur into risk. Then, years of restoration that demanded sacrifice. Each stage left marks. Some physical, some emotional, some still debated. Investigators see evidence. Preservation teams see memory. Locals speak of stories that linger at the edges of documentation. And as the light fades across the property and the rooms darken again, one question remains. What survived inside Oheka Mansion? And what refused to leave? So here comes the first truth about this amazing mansion. In the early years of the 20th century, the foundations of Oheka Mansion rose from a cleared hilltop overlooking Long Island. The machinery stopped. The workers stepped back. Concrete frames locked into place. The air felt heavy with purpose. This property was not designed like many other grand homes of its time. Records show that its structure relied on reinforced steel and poured concrete, layer upon layer, forming walls that resisted flame and collapse. The decision was deliberate. It reflected an earlier loss that left a mark on its owner's life and reputation. The sound of hammers and iron against stone carried across the property like a reminder of that earlier destruction. To many observers, it looked like strength. To others, it suggested caution, even fear. The rooms were built to hold memories and protect them from disaster. The terraces stretched outward, but the materials turned inward, toward safety. The question that followed stayed unspoken. Was this architecture an expression of confidence, or was it an attempt to keep something from happening again? Historical accounts link this reinforced construction to an earlier event in the life of financier Otto Hermann Kahn. Records indicate that a previous residence associated with him had been destroyed by fire. The damage was severe. The loss was public. The consequences extended beyond architecture. It affected identity. It affected perception. In response, when Oheka Mansion was planned, the design shifted away from vulnerability. Engineers and architects relied on industrial strength materials rather than wood framing. Floors carried weight through metal beams. Stairways were anchored into solid cores. The intention appears practical and emotional at the same time. It protected valuables. It projected stability. It also attempted to erase the memory of something fragile. Workers moved across the site in measured patterns. Cement mixers turned through long days. The mansion grew taller and broader. Each level reinforced the one below it. The result was more than a residence. It was a structure shaped by caution after loss. And while the exterior appeared elegant, the inside framework suggested a deeper story about risk, fear, and the need to ensure that destruction would never return in the same way. As the mansion neared completion, the atmosphere around the project carried a quiet intensity. Wealth had purchased space, design, and detail, but beneath the surface, the materials spoke of defense. Visitors who study the building today note the weight of its corridors and the absence of vulnerability in its walls. Preservation records describe durability that outlived decades of neglect, storms, and changing ownership. That durability came at a cost. It fixed the structure in a permanent posture of resistance. The mansion became strong, but it also became heavy. Emotionally, architecturally. Some historians believe that this strength reflected a desire to control uncertainty. Others see it as a practical reaction to an earlier disaster. In either case, the consequence is visible even now. The building stands as proof of how fear can shape design as much as ambition does. For some viewers, that strength feels reassuring. For others, it feels unsettling. The walls hold on to more than sound and air. They hold on to intention. They hold on to what once burned and what would never be allowed to burn again. And beneath that strength lies a lingering question about what was being protected and why it mattered so much. When the structure received its name, it became more than a residence. It became a symbol of identity. The name Oheka was formed from the initials of its owner, Otto Hermann Kahn. Records confirm the letters came directly from his name, arranged into a single word that branded the estate with personal authorship. The choice was unusual. It sounded grand and distant, yet it pointed inward toward the individual behind it. Architects associated with the project included Delano and Aldrich, and landscape planning connected to Beatrix Farrand. Their work shaped terraces, gardens, and long visual lines that extended beyond the reinforced frame of the mansion. The emotional effect was complex. The exterior projected beauty and confidence. The internal structure projected caution and protection. Together, they created a visual contradiction. Strength wrapped in elegance. Restraint hidden beneath luxury. Some historians believe this blend reflects the tension between wealth and vulnerability in that era of American expansion. Others see it as a personal signature, a declaration that memory and control could exist in the same space. The consequence is visible even today. The name remains. The initials remain. And the identity of the building continues to carry the voice of its maker across time. Over time, stories began to form around certain rooms and corridors inside Oheka Mansion. Visitors described long hallways where sound seemed to travel in unpredictable ways. Maintenance workers from later decades reported moments where footsteps echoed after the last person had left a floor. Local folklore suggests that these spaces hold emotional residue from earlier years of wealth, loss, and abandonment. Some guests, according to anecdotal accounts, spoke of faint piano tones late at night, even when no instrument was in use nearby. A few stories mention a locked service passage where temperature shifts felt sudden and unexplained. But preservation reports provide alternative explanations. Architects note that the reinforced concrete frame creates unusual acoustics. Sound bounces along structural channels. Temperature changes occur when air pockets meet sealed corridors. Records suggest these experiences may come from design rather than presence. Both interpretations exist side by side, one framed in memory and imagination, the other grounded in engineering and environment. A small but often repeated odd detail adds to the strangeness. Early staff routines required walking more than a mile of interior hallway to complete nightly checks. The repetition, the silence, and the scale created moments that felt larger than life, and sometimes larger than reason. As researchers and preservation teams study Oheka Mansion today, the focus often shifts from mystery to human effort. Records show the estate required extensive staffing during its early years, with service workers managing mechanical systems, gardens, and daily logistics across massive interior distances. The reinforced structure protected the building. But it also trapped sound, pressure, and routine within its walls. Historians believe this sense of containment influenced how people experienced the space. Practical details explain much of the unusual atmosphere. Narrow service passages redirect airflow. Heavy doors close with delays. Subfloor spaces carry vibrations from distant movement. Yet, there is still one detail that continues to feel strange, even when examined logically. During a later period of decline, before full restoration, reports describe birds nesting inside upper corridor spaces while the lower floors remained structurally intact and nearly untouched. It created a divided environment. Order below, wild intrusion above. The emotional effect on those who entered during those years was unsettling. A place built for control now held fragments of unpredictability. The consequence remains visible in memory and record. Strength preserved the building. Time reshaped its meaning. And the question persists. Was the design protecting its contents, or was it protecting something deeper inside the people who built it? Across documentation, the scale of Oheka Mansion reveals the magnitude of its intention. Records list more than 120 rooms spread across multiple floors. The interior footprint reaches approximately 109,000 square feet. Construction spanned 5 years, beginning in 1914 and progressing through 1919 as materials, labor, and engineering methods intensified around the reinforced core. Contemporary sources estimate that the original project cost exceeded $11 million in early 20th century currency, a number that would rise dramatically when adjusted for modern value. Service operations required teams of staff moving through corridors that stretched more than 400 feet in certain wings. Mechanical systems supported water, heat, and maintenance across acre-spanning terraces and gardens planned with exacting detail. These numbers do more than describe size. They describe pressure. They show how the structure demanded movement, attention, and constant stewardship. During periods of neglect, those same dimensions turned into burden. Empty rooms amplified echo. Long hallways intensified silence. Restoration records from the late 20th century reference thousands of replaced windows, repaired surfaces, and stabilized walls. The scale made preservation possible. It also made decay inevitable when care disappeared. The result is both proof of ambition and evidence of vulnerability hidden inside magnitude. Today, Oheka Mansion stands as a structure shaped by fear, resilience, pride, and endurance. The reinforced frame still carries the choices made after earlier loss. The name still carries the identity of its maker. The gardens still outline intention. The rooms still hold the weight of time. Preservation efforts returned life to corridors that once stood empty. Yet some spaces retain a quiet tension. Visitors seeking history see architecture and documentation. Visitors drawn to the unexplained sense atmosphere and unanswered impressions. Both responses exist in the same environment. Evidence explains much of the story. Memory explains the rest. The consequence of its design is clear. Strength allowed survival through neglect, damage, and uncertainty. But strength also preserved every layer of emotion that shaped its creation. The building endures, and so do the questions tied to it. Was this place built to guard possessions, or was it built to guard the past itself? Was it a monument to confidence, or a shelter against the fear of collapse? The structure remains. The materials endure. The meaning evolves. And one final uncertainty lingers at the edge of its history. In protecting the building, what else did the walls choose to keep? Number 2 is strange, and you might laugh at first. But the deeper you go, the more uneasy it becomes. Years after the early era of grandeur faded, Oheka Mansion entered a chapter that few people expect when they first see its vast terraces and formal gardens. The property did not remain a symbol of elite gatherings forever. Instead, records show that it transitioned into institutional life. Classrooms appeared where private rooms once stood. Drill routines replaced social evenings. The building became home to a military training academy. The transformation reshaped the meaning of every hallway and courtyard. The structure that once protected wealth now carried discipline, marching orders, and strict routines. The atmosphere changed. The sound of music disappeared. Footsteps became synchronized. The emotional tone shifted from display to control. What began as an architectural dream of safety and elegance was now a place of instruction and structure. Some observers at the time saw resilience in that transition. Others saw irony. A mansion built to guard against loss had become a site where young cadets learned about preparation, order, and consequence. And beneath that shift, a new question formed. What happens when a place built for luxury is forced to redefine its purpose? Archival records confirm that Oheka Mansion served as the Eastern Military Academy during the mid-20th century. Dormitories filled rooms once designed for guests and private gatherings. Parade grounds marked areas that had once framed garden views. Students lived under regimented schedules. Early mornings. Inspections, physical drills across stone walkways and interior corridors. The emotional landscape of the building changed with them. The reinforced concrete that once represented fear and protection now represented discipline and endurance. Historians studying this period describe a quiet tension between the original intention of the architecture and its new function. Walls meant to symbolize permanence now witnessed routine, effort, and fatigue. Some former cadets later recalled the feeling of moving through spaces that seemed too large for their purpose. Grand rooms turned into practical spaces. Beauty reduced to backdrop. Consequence became central. The building no longer held only memory of one family or one era. It held the weight of countless decisions, lessons, expectations, and personal struggles experienced within its walls. The structure endured. The people inside adapted. And the identity of the mansion shifted once again, carrying traces of ambition and discipline layered together in a way that still feels complex and unresolved. The strange part, the part that feels almost absurd at first, comes from how this transformation altered daily life inside the mansion. Reports from academy records describe cadets running drills through corridors meant for formal gatherings. Staircases built for quiet movement became routes for rapid formation changes. Some accounts mention moments where recruits marched past ornate ceilings and intricate details without ever being allowed to acknowledge them. The environment created a sharp emotional contrast. Luxury above. Hard training below. Order inside spaces once designed for leisure. For some students, the experience felt surreal. They lived inside a symbol of wealth, yet their lives were ruled by discipline, repetition, and pressure. Preservation researchers believe this emotional divide left a lasting impression on the building's atmosphere. A curious paradox took shape. A mansion designed to control risk now became a place that controlled people. A structure built from fear now trained resilience. The consequence was profound. The meaning of every room changed again. And for many who return to reflect on those years, one strange question remains. Was the building adapting to survival, or was it reminding everyone inside that identity is never as fixed as stone and concrete suggest? As the academy years continued, the mansion's identity transformed in ways that felt both practical and symbolic. Records show that the estate was reshaped to support routine, education, and control. Large rooms became dormitories, quiet corridors became inspection lanes, open terraces turned into gathering spaces for formation drills. The emotional tone inside the building followed that shift. Younger cadets arrived hopeful, uncertain, or determined, and the structure absorbed those feelings like it once absorbed wealth and spectacle. Historians who study this period believe the transition marked a turning point not only for the mansion, but for the meaning of its architecture. It was no longer a stage for prominence. It became a vessel for discipline and personal testing. The walls that once represented safety now represented expectation. The consequence was powerful. The building carried traces of effort, exhaustion, ambition, and resilience layered on top of its earlier history. Some former students later described a quiet awareness of living inside something built for a different world. They sensed beauty around them, but their lives were defined by rule and repetition. That emotional contrast shaped memory. It also deepened the sense that the mansion was no longer one story, but many stories sharing the same space. Over time, stories from the academy years developed their own layer of folklore. Some former residents, in later interviews and personal reflections, recalled nights when the building felt unusually still. They spoke of footsteps echoing through upper corridors after lights out, even when attendance records confirmed every cadet was accounted for. Others described doors that seemed to close slowly on their own during late-night inspections. A few memory accounts mention faint sounds in distant hallways, a chair sliding, a hinge shifting, a tone in the air that felt out of place. Local storytellers connected those moments to the building's earlier era, suggesting that traces of past life remained within its structure. Paranormal enthusiasts interpret these accounts as lingering presence, emotional residue from the mansion's earlier transformation from luxury to duty. But historians approach the same stories through a different lens. They see pressure, fatigue, isolation, and the psychological weight of discipline interacting with memory. The strange details remain. They are part of experience. They are part of narrative, and they invite a question that refuses to settle. Were these events proof of something unexplained, or were they echoes created by stress, architecture, and the tension of life lived inside a space that never forgot its past? Preservation specialists and architectural researchers offer grounded explanations for many of these strange accounts. They note that the reinforced concrete frame of Oheka Mansion produces unusual acoustics. Sound can travel along structural channels, creating delayed echoes that seem detached from their source. Maintenance logs from later decades document temperature shifts caused by uninsulated service corridors and large, hollow spaces between floors. These conditions can cause metal fixtures to expand and contract, generating unpredictable noise patterns at night. Historians believe that academy routines intensified the psychological impact of these effects. Long hours, strict schedules, isolation from outside life. Young cadets moved through vast halls that were never originally designed for institutional living. The space amplified emotion. It amplified fatigue. What felt supernatural to some may have been environmental physics mixed with human stress. Yet, even with rational explanation, the atmosphere remains difficult to dismiss completely. The mansion held a life built from wealth, then layered with discipline, effort, and quiet endurance. That layering creates a feeling that rational analysis can describe, but not fully dissolve. The consequence is a space where structure explains function, but experience explains meaning, and meaning rarely follows simple lines. Records from the Academy period reveal the scale of transformation inside Oheka Mansion. Documentation lists more than 120 rooms adapted for dormitories, offices, classrooms, and support operations. The building spanned roughly 109,000 square feet, requiring daily maintenance across corridors that stretched more than 400 feet in certain wings. Academy rosters from selected years reference student bodies ranging between 200 and 350 cadets, supported by faculty and staff totaling 30 to 50 personnel during peak semesters. Training schedules recorded morning formations beginning before 600 a.m., followed by academic periods lasting 6 to 8 hours each day. Utility records show significant resource consumption, including heating systems operating across multiple mechanical zones and maintenance teams tracking repairs across more than 20 major service sections of the property. These numbers do more than quantify adaptation. They reveal pressure. They show how a residence built for private life was re-engineered into an institution that depended on endurance, structure, and constant oversight. The scale amplified both order and strain. It preserved the building through use. It also imprinted human effort, discipline, and fatigue into every corridor, leaving marks that numbers can describe, but only experience can fully feel. When the academy years finally ended, Oheka Mansion stood in silence again. The drills stopped, the routines faded, the sound of regimented footsteps left the corridors, and the building returned to a state of uncertainty. The transition carried consequence. Empty rooms remembered effort. Surfaces carried faint traces of institutional life layered over the remains of a luxury past. Preservation archives describe the estate entering a vulnerable period after the academy closed, when maintenance declined and the property faced neglect, vandalism, and slow deterioration. The structure endured, but the meaning of the place grew heavier. It had been a symbol of ambition, then a vessel of discipline. Now it became a lingering echo of both. Visitors who walk the grounds today sense that layered history. Some come seeking documentation and architectural record. Others arrive because stories from former cadets and later observers hint at something lingering between memory and presence. Both experiences coexist. The rational story explains transformation, economics, and adaptation. The emotional story explains displacement, endurance, and identity. The consequence is complex. The mansion survived, but survival changed it. It became a place shaped by what it once promised and what it was forced to become. And in that tension, a question remains. When a structure absorbs so many lives and roles, does it preserve history, or does history begin to shape those who enter it in return? Number 3 feels unsettling because it begins quietly, and the quiet does not feel peaceful. After the academy years ended, Oheka Mansion entered a period of uncertainty that changed both its appearance and its spirit. The grounds grew still, maintenance slowed, windows fractured one by one. Weather found its way into rooms that were once guarded carefully. Records describe long corridors standing empty, collecting dust and debris as seasons turned, with no one to answer them. The silence carried weight. It felt different from wealth, different from discipline. It felt abandoned. During these years, the property became vulnerable. Vandals entered. Fires were attempted. Surfaces cracked under neglect. The building endured, but it endured alone. Some observers saw a broken monument. Others saw a reminder that permanence is an illusion. The atmosphere around the mansion deepened into something that felt both tragic and uneasy. And as the structure stood against neglect, one question kept rising from every abandoned room and damaged wall. When a place built to project strength is left without purpose, what part of it fades first, the structure or the meaning that once lived inside it? Preservation records from the late 20th century document the severity of this decline. Windows were shattered across multiple floors. Graffiti covered interior sections. Unsecured entrances allowed trespassing, and portions of the roofline suffered gradual weather damage. Reports indicate attempted fires in isolated areas, some extinguished before structural harm could spread, others leaving scorched marks that restoration teams would later confront. The emotional cost of this period is visible in photographs and inspection notes. A residence built through wealth, caution, and discipline now stood in fragments of its former identity. Rooms built to symbolize control became open to chance. Stairways that once carried order now held debris and broken fixtures. Architects and preservationists who later studied the building, described the period as a turning point. The structure proved its durability. It did not collapse. But durability came with a price. It trapped memory inside decay. It preserved absence. The mansion became a place where beauty and damage existed side by side, each reflecting the other. The consequence was haunting in its own way, not because of superstition, but because of the way neglect can echo louder than sound. During these abandoned years, a second story formed, not in official reports, but in local memory. Residents from nearby communities spoke of explorers entering after dark, moving quietly through empty corridors and cold stairwells. Some told stories of distant footsteps in areas thought to be empty, or faint sounds drifting through upper floors when wind moved through broken windows. Others claimed that certain rooms felt heavier than others, as if emotion lingered after the people were gone. Paranormal enthusiasts later pointed to these accounts as signs that the mansion carried more than material history. They believed the building retained fragments of the lives that once filled it. But preservation experts offer practical explanations. Vacant structures amplify sound. Air pressure shifts through gaps in damaged openings. Metal fixtures expand and contract. Concrete releases heat slowly at night. Records suggest these conditions can create unusual echoes and movements that feel mysterious, especially in darkness and silence. Yet even with rational explanations, the feeling of abandonment remains powerful. The atmosphere refused to feel empty. It felt paused, suspended, waiting. And that unresolved tension raises a question that neither folklore nor engineering fully answers. When a place stands abandoned for years, does it simply decay, or does it begin to remember? As the abandoned years continued, the damage became more than physical. It also became emotional, recorded not only in preservation notes, but in the reactions of those who saw the property in that state. Inspectors described rooms stripped of purpose, doors broken from their frames, hallways marked by smoke and soot. Some historians believe this period revealed the hidden cost of earlier ambition. A structure built to control risk now faced the one threat it could not resist: neglect. The reinforced walls survived, but the details that gave the mansion character slowly disappeared. Plaster fell from ceilings. Decorative elements faded beneath layers of weather and intrusion. The emotional tone inside the building shifted again. It no longer spoke of wealth or discipline. It spoke of absence. Visitors during this era often described a strange silence that felt heavier than sound itself. The consequence of abandonment was not just loss of beauty. It was loss of meaning. The building remained standing, but its identity fractured. What once represented pride now represented endurance without purpose, and within that endurance, a new tension emerged, a sense that the structure was holding on, but not to the life it once knew. As damage increased, the stories surrounding Oheka Mansion grew darker and more imaginative. Local accounts from this era mentioned teenagers exploring the property at night and returning with unsettling descriptions. Some claimed they heard furniture moving in distant rooms, even when the floors above were unsafe and inaccessible. Others spoke of sudden cold drafts along sealed corridors or subtle vibrations beneath the floor, as if something was shifting inside the walls. Paranormal enthusiasts later treated these anecdotes as evidence that the building held emotional remnants of its past lives, the era of wealth, the academy years, and the period of loss layered into something unresolved. But preservation reports provide grounded alternatives. Structural engineers explain that damaged roofs allowed wind to move through interior cavities. Broken window frames created pressure zones. Long concrete spans carried echoes for surprising distances. Records suggest many of these effects were environmental, intensified by neglect and structural fatigue. Yet the stories persisted. They did not disappear even when logic entered the conversation. The building's condition invited imagination because it no longer felt like a home or an institution. It felt like a memory standing in physical form. And memory rarely stays quiet. When the first efforts toward preservation finally began, they did not erase the atmosphere of the abandoned years. They revealed it. Restoration specialists documented structural scars in detail, layers of soot, burn marks along beams, graffiti across walls that once displayed refined interiors. Workers approached the site with caution. They noted how the reinforced frame had prevented collapse, yet also trapped signs of damage inside the building. Historians believe this paradox explains why the mansion felt haunting even without superstition. It was not the presence of unseen forces, it was the presence of everything that happened, and everything that was lost. Practical labor slowly replaced neglect. Broken panes were removed, damaged surfaces stabilized, but the emotional residue remained visible in every inspection report. Preservation workers described a sense of responsibility that went beyond structural repair. They were restoring more than architecture. They were restoring continuity after years of interruption. The consequence of this period is clear in the historical record. Survival came with scars. The building endured, but endurance came with weight, and that weight shaped how future visitors would interpret what they saw, whether through history, memory, or mystery. Archival documentation from the decline period records the scale of loss and survival in measurable detail. Inspection surveys identified damage across more than 30 interior sections of the mansion. Restoration teams later replaced or stabilized over 1,000 panes of glass. Structural reports listed reinforced concrete spans extending more than 400 feet in key corridors, which prevented catastrophic failure even as surrounding surfaces deteriorated. Preservation budgets from early recovery phases exceeded several $1 million, allocated across roofing stabilization, window reconstruction, stone repair, and environmental control. Photographic archives cataloged deterioration across multiple floors, with damage concentrated in upper levels exposed to weather intrusion. Fire-related incidents referenced in records affected select localized areas, leaving scorched zones that required later reconstruction and safety analysis. These numbers do more than quantify decay and recovery. They reveal the tension between strength and vulnerability. They show how scale protected the structure while amplifying the impact of neglect. The mansion survived because of its engineering. It suffered because of its abandonment. And that balance remains one of the most striking truths in its historical timeline. Today, evidence of the abandoned years exists in photographs, records, and memory, and in subtle traces that restoration cannot fully erase. The building stands restored, but not rewritten. It carries its survival openly. Some visitors see resilience in that history. Others sense an echo that lingers between what was lost and what was saved. Documentary researchers point to structural data, timelines, and preservation reports to explain the story of endurance. Paranormal audiences look at the same spaces and feel that absence leaves an imprint no measurement can fully describe. Both interpretations coexist. The rational story explains how engineering resisted collapse. The emotional story explains why the silence of abandonment still feels present in certain rooms. The consequence is layered. The mansion remains a testament to design, vulnerability, and survival through neglect. It endures because people chose to bring it back. But endurance does not erase memory. It preserves it. And as the building continues to stand, one quiet question remains. When a place survives abandonment, does it return to what it once was, or does it become something new, shaped forever by the years when it stood alone? Number 4 feels strange, and it begins with a rumor that refuses to disappear. For years, visitors and workers have repeated the same quiet suggestion that beneath Oheka Mansion There may be hidden routes, sealed corridors, or forgotten service passages built during its earliest decades. The story begins in dim basements and mechanical rooms where shadows stretch along concrete walls. Pipes run overhead. Air moves slowly through narrow spaces. Some who have been there describe sections that feel older than the rest of the structure, as if time settled differently underground. The atmosphere creates unease. It invites questions. Records confirm that the mansion required extensive service circulation during its early operation, including delivery areas, mechanical zones, and staff access routes positioned below primary floors. But beyond what is officially documented, local memory adds something more. It speaks of blocked doorways, bricked-off arches, and corridors that appear to lead nowhere. Some visitors see mystery in those spaces. Others see function. The tension between what is recorded and what is imagined shapes the story. And the question rises from every sealed edge and unfinished wall. Were these areas simply part of complex infrastructure, or do they suggest something deeper beneath the mansion's history? Architectural records and preservation notes provide a grounded starting point. They show that the lower levels of Oheka Mansion were designed for operational support. Storage areas, boiler rooms, service circulation routes for staff who maintained utilities, supplies, and daily function. Engineers working during the restoration period documented reinforced foundations, thick retaining walls, and connected maintenance corridors that allowed workers to move unseen during early years of operation. These features were practical. They supported privacy, efficiency, and order in a residence of extraordinary size. Historians believe many of the so-called mystery passages originated from that system, later sealed or redirected as functions changed over decades. But the emotional weight of these spaces makes them feel larger than their purpose. They sit beneath rooms shaped by wealth, loss, discipline, and abandonment. They carry sounds differently. They smell of rust, dust, and slow time. Visitors who study them describe an environment where purpose feels thin and interpretation grows thicker. The consequence is psychological. Even when records explain the layout, the mind senses something unresolved. Infrastructure becomes metaphor. Utility becomes story, and the presence of sealed doors raises a question that documentation answers technically, but never completely. Over time, folklore attached itself to these underground spaces. Some accounts from workers and late-night staff describe hearing faint movement in distant service corridors when no one else was present. Others recall drafts of cold air rising through floor grates during still evenings, or soft echoes that seemed disconnected from any visible source. A few local stories even suggest that one blocked passage once extended farther than expected, though no verified survey confirms that claim. Paranormal enthusiasts interpret these details as evidence that the lower levels retain emotional residue from every chapter of the mansion's life. The ambition of its creation, the discipline of the academy years, the emptiness of abandonment. But architectural specialists present another explanation. They point to ventilation channels, temperature differentials, concealed pipes, and structural geometry that redirects sound in unpredictable ways. Records suggest that underground environments magnify perception, especially when lighting is low and orientation is unclear. Both interpretations persist. Neither fully cancels the other. The spaces remain real. The feelings remain real. And that unresolved contrast fuels the mystery that surrounds them. Are these lower corridors simply engineering and acoustics? Or are they the last silent witnesses to stories that never reached the upper floors? As restoration work progressed in later decades, crews began to revisit sections of the lower levels that had been left untouched for years. Inspection teams documented blocked thresholds, patched masonry, and former access points that no longer served functional purpose. None of these discoveries confirmed the existence of secret routes, but they deepened the emotional impact of the space. Workers described standing in narrow corridors where the air felt still and layered with time. Equipment lights illuminated dust on concrete and exposed brick. The atmosphere created a sense of suspended history, as if the lower floors were holding on to a version of the building that no longer existed above. Historians reviewing these notes believe the experience reveals an important truth. The underground areas carried the physical memory of transition, from private life to institutional function, from abandonment to repair. They did not hide conspiracy. They held continuity. Yet, that continuity feels uneasy. It reminds observers that every visible moment in the mansion's history rests upon foundations the public rarely sees. The consequence is psychological rather than supernatural. The lower spaces confront visitors with the unseen labor, change, and cost that shaped the building's survival. And that realization alone can feel mysterious. Despite documentation and structural analysis, folklore around the underground areas did not fade. Instead, it adapted. Some late-night maintenance workers recalled moments when sound traveled in unfamiliar ways, appearing suddenly from distant corners and disappearing just as quickly. Others described narrow passages where the temperature shifted as if cold air were emerging from inside the walls. A few accounts mention a sensation of being observed while working alone in mechanical spaces, though no one reported seeing anything solid. Paranormal communities collected these stories and shaped them into a narrative of emotional residue, suggesting that every stage of the mansion's life left something behind beneath the floors. But environmental specialists propose grounded explanations. They point to air displacement from ventilation ducts, pressure changes between sealed rooms, and structural geometry that redirect sound through hollow spaces. Records suggest that underground architecture often produces sensations that feel personal even when they are mechanical. Yet uncertainty remains because experience carries weight. What people feel in those spaces cannot be measured as easily as temperature or sound frequency. And so the story divides. One version lives in folklore. One lives in engineering reports. Both continue to exist because neither can fully erase the other. When preservation teams evaluated the underground levels, their focus remained practical. They reinforced walls, they stabilized pipes, they mapped mechanical routes that had shifted across decades of repurposing. The work revealed the structure's endurance, but also its vulnerability. Moisture left marks along seams. Rust formed around old fixtures. These signs told a story of survival through neglect and repair. Historians believe this reality explains much of the unease associated with the space. It is not the presence of hidden corridors leading to unknown destinations. It is the presence of effort layered across time. Every repair is a reminder of previous damage. Every sealed opening reflects a decision made in response to change. The lower floors hold the labor that allowed the mansion to remain standing through collapse, academy life, abandonment, and restoration. That labor is invisible to most visitors. It lives in darkness, concrete, and mechanical echo. The consequence is emotional rather than mystical. The underground spaces reveal the cost of endurance. They show that preservation is not heroic or romantic. It is repetitive, physical, and unglamorous, a constant negotiation against decay. And that truth can feel unsettling because it replaces myth with effort, and effort is harder to romanticize. Archival records provide numerical context for these lower-level systems. Documentation references multiple mechanical rooms supporting utilities across more than 120 interior rooms above. Inspection maps chart service corridors extending over 300 to 400 feet in certain wings. Restoration reports list the stabilization of dozens of structural columns and reinforcement along several thousand square feet of subfloor space. Utility records note that earlier operational periods required separate heating and maintenance zones, each monitored through underground access points. Engineering surveys recorded pipe networks spanning hundreds of linear feet, with ventilation channels designed to redirect airflow throughout the building. These numbers reflect infrastructure rather than secrecy. They reveal complexity created by scale, adaptation, and time. They also explain why certain areas feel disconnected or sealed. Functions changed, routes closed. New systems replaced old ones. The lower floors became a layered record of every transformation the mansion endured. The figures confirm material reality, but they also heighten emotional weight by demonstrating just how much of the building's life exists out of sight, beneath the rooms where its most visible stories took place. Today, the underground spaces remain part of the building's structure and its story. Some areas are documented and understood. Others are sealed, stabilized, or inaccessible, preserved as fragments of earlier design. For historians, these spaces represent infrastructure, adaptation, and survival, the unseen network that allowed the mansion to endure across a turbulent past. For those drawn to the unexplained, they symbolize mystery, memory, and unanswered possibility. Both interpretations continue to coexist because both contain elements of truth. The lower levels are physical, measurable, and engineered. Yet they also hold the emotional weight of everything that happened above them. The consequence is a narrative that never fully resolves. The underground spaces remain neither purely practical nor entirely mysterious. They remain suspended between explanation and experience. And as visitors imagine what might lie beyond a sealed door or an unfinished corridor, one question lingers quietly in the background. In a place built on strength, loss, endurance, and memory, do the deepest rooms simply support the structure? Or do they guard the stories that the upper floors were never meant to tell? Number 5 feels unusual because it reveals a truth that existed quietly while the mansion appeared brilliant on the surface. During its early years, Oheka Mansion functioned as two different worlds sharing the same structure. One world lived in the upper floors, among formal rooms, social gatherings, and carefully staged displays of wealth. The other existed behind doors that guests were never meant to see. Service corridors, narrow stairways, mechanical rooms, staff quarters placed far from the spaces of comfort and elegance. Records show that this separation was intentional, designed to maintain order and privacy for those living and entertaining above. But the physical divide created emotional contrast. Light filled some rooms while others remained dim. Music carried through halls while silent effort continued elsewhere. Workers moved through the building in quiet routes, unseen yet essential. The mansion appeared calm to visitors, but beneath that calm was constant motion. Human labor sustained its beauty. Human fatigue sustained its order. Over time, this contrast created a tension that still echoes through the design. And one question rises from those divided spaces. How much of the mansion's grandeur depended on lives that were never meant to be visible? Architectural plans and estate records confirm the scale of this separation. Staff routes connected kitchens, storage areas, and service corridors so that movement could occur without interrupting social life upstairs. Narrow staircases linked lower rooms to upper floors, allowing workers to appear briefly, complete their tasks, and disappear again. Quarters assigned to staff were smaller and more confined than the grand living spaces reserved for guests and family. Historians studying this design note that it reflected the social hierarchy of its time. Privacy and presentation shaped architecture. Efficiency shaped human movement. But inside those hidden corridors, life carried pressure that rarely appears in photographs or public history. Long hours, physical work, quiet responsibility. Workers navigated the mansion's structure differently from those who occupied its public spaces. For them, the building was not only a symbol of wealth, it was a landscape of effort and expectation. The consequence of that divide remains visible in the design itself. Wide rooms above, tight passageways below, beauty and labor held apart by distance and walls. And when we look back at the structure today, the question becomes heavier. Whose experience truly defined the meaning of the mansion, those who lived in its light, or those who worked in its shadows? Over time, stories emerged from these hidden service areas, especially from the years when the mansion later fell into silence. Some explorers and maintenance workers described a feeling of unease while walking through the older staff corridors at night. They spoke of faint echoes traveling along narrow passages or sudden drafts moving through sections where no windows remained open. A few accounts mentioned the impression that someone had just passed through a hallway moments before, even when the building was known to be empty. Paranormal enthusiasts interpret these moments as emotional residue left behind by years of unseen labor, footsteps that once moved quickly, voices that were never meant to reach the upper rooms, lives lived in quiet separation. But architectural analysis offers grounded explanations. Sound travels differently in tight concrete channels. Air shifts through mechanical openings. Old materials respond to temperature and pressure. Records suggest that these natural effects can create sensations that feel personal even when they are environmental. Yet the emotional weight remains. The contrast between visible luxury and hidden labor gives these spaces a depth that explanation cannot entirely remove. And it leaves an unresolved question behind. Do these corridors echo because of physics, or because they still carry the memory of those who moved through them? As daily life continued inside Oheka Mansion, the divide between the visible and hidden worlds shaped the way the building functioned and the way people experienced it. Records from estate management describe schedules that began before sunrise and extended late into the night. Staff moved through stairwells and narrow corridors in carefully timed patterns to avoid crossing into public spaces during formal events. The rhythm of work never matched the calm dignity seen in the rooms above. It moved faster. It carried urgency. It demanded precision. Historians who examine this structure of separation believe it reflected a broader social reality of the period, but inside the mansion, it took on a physical form. Distance became hierarchy. Space became status. Emotion followed architecture. Workers lived their lives in circulation rather than display. Their footsteps traced routes that guests would never know existed. Over time, that contrast left an imprint on the building's identity. The mansion was not only a symbol of wealth, it was also a record of effort, repetition, and endurance that unfolded behind closed doors. The consequence of that design remains visible even today. It reveals how grandeur can depend on the quiet labor that sustains it, and how memory can cling more strongly to the spaces that were never meant to be seen. As years passed and the mansion changed purpose, stories from the service sections gained their own layer of folklore. Some later visitors, preservation workers, inspectors, and allowed explorers reported moments when the building seemed to recall the movement of people long gone. They described hearing faint rhythm-like echoes traveling through the service stairwells, as if footsteps were repeating a route that no longer existed in daily life. Others recalled sudden pockets of cold air appearing in corridor intersections, or doors that seemed to shift slightly on their hinges during silent hours. Paranormal audiences interpret these details as traces of emotional memory tied to the lives of staff members whose presence rarely reached historical record. They see the hidden corridors as places where human experience concentrated and remained. But structural analysts offer practical explanations rooted in design. Concrete channels bounce sound in narrow patterns. Air pressure shifts through mechanical shafts. Aging materials adjust with temperature and create movement that feels almost intentional. Records suggest that perception becomes heightened in enclosed, low-light environments where orientation is limited. Yet the feelings do not vanish with explanation. They remain part of the atmosphere. And they leave behind a lingering question. Do these spaces feel alive because of acoustics, or because history presses closer in the places where it was once kept invisible? When historians and preservation specialists revisit the hidden service areas, their focus often turns away from mystery and toward human cost. Work logs and archival notes reveal how much effort passed through those corridors. Deliveries carried by hand. Mechanical failures repaired quietly. Long shifts lived far from sunlight and celebration. The architecture preserved separation because separation made the household function. But it also preserved inequality in physical form. The building's design recorded who moved freely and who moved carefully, who occupied rooms of comfort and who traveled through spaces of labor. This reality explains why the atmosphere of those passages feels heavier than structural explanation alone. The corridors hold more than pipes and plaster. They hold records of unrecognized work. They hold traces of exhaustion that history rarely names. Preservation workers who study these sections describe a sense of responsibility in documenting them, because they reveal a dimension of the mansion's story that photographs of receptions and garden views cannot show. The consequence is subtle but powerful. The hidden world does not challenge the grandeur above it. It completes it. And in completing it, it forces us to confront a truth that rarely appears in formal history. The most fragile part of a great structure is often not the walls, but the people who carried its weight. Archival data helps reveal the scale of this divided world. Estate records reference more than 120 interior rooms supported by service circulation networks below and behind the main living areas. Historical floor plans document multiple service stairwells linking lower corridors to upper floors, some extending over 4 to 5 vertical levels. Staff quarters and workspaces occupied sections, totaling several tens of thousands of square feet, distributed across wings that stretched more than 300 to 400 feet in length. Operational logs from early years note dozens of workers active during peak seasons, managing kitchens, mechanical systems, ground support, and household logistics. Supply inventories track deliveries weighing hundreds of pounds transported through narrow passages each week. Mechanical diagrams list heating and service lines running across hundreds of linear feet beneath and behind visible rooms. These numbers translate architecture into reality. They show that the hidden world was not symbolic or minor. It was vast. It was structured. It was necessary. And its scale reveals how much of the mansion's life unfolded away from view, in spaces where effort supported elegance, and where endurance became the quiet foundation beneath every moment that appeared effortless. Today, the divided architecture of Oheka Mansion remains visible to those who look closely. The grand rooms still stand, restored and preserved as visible markers of ambition and status. The narrow corridors and service routes still exist in sections, stabilized and documented as artifacts of daily life that rarely entered the photographs of the past. Historians interpret these spaces as evidence of social structure, labor, and hierarchy. Visitors drawn to mystery see them as places where emotion collects and memory lingers in quiet corners. Both responses contain truth. The physical design explains how the building functioned. The emotional response explains how it feels to stand inside the places where unseen lives unfolded. The consequence is a deeper understanding of the mansion itself. It is not only a story of wealth, transformation, abandonment, and survival. It is also a story of people whose work moved silently through spaces meant to remain hidden. And as those corridors continue to exist in shadow, one unresolved question remains at the edge of the narrative. In a structure built to separate visibility from effort, which world truly shaped its legacy? The one that everyone admired, or the one that almost no one ever saw?